Seahawks absolutely romped the Falcons that day. But I just enjoyed the experience of being in there. And, that was one of the first days in particular that I really knew, okay, this is a profession for me. Now, there were a lot of perks included in this, the good food, the view, just being treated a little bit differently than the normal fan would be treated. But what really showed me that this was the profession for me in that particular moment,
right,
it was the fact that I was 17 years old and I knew how to handle myself around all of these veteran journalists who had been in the profession for decades. And I didn't allow myself to get starstruck around the journalists, around the players, around the coaches, around anybody. I just looked at myself that day and I looked at how I handled myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I know for a fact now that this is for me.
Right.
I know that this is something that I want to officially pursue, and this is something I'm going to take full steam ahead. And, Scott, the first professional football player, the first professional athlete in general I actually interviewed was Richard Sherman.
Really?
So I'm always gonna have a different type of affection for Richard Sherman, even though I know he can be a controversial player. He can say some controversial things. He can go about the business of football sometimes controversially, sometimes questionable, sometimes not exactly traditional way of doing things in the NFL. But I'm always going to feel different about Richard Sherman. I'm always going to feel different about the Seattle Seahawks. And I'm actually a closet San Francisco 49ers fan right now, simply because Richard Sherman is playing.
Right.
I'm always going to have that type of affection for Richard Sherman, not just because he was the first professional athlete I interviewed, but, Scott, he looked at me when I first walked up to him, and he said, "You look like a kid." And I said, "I am. I'm 17 years old." And he couldn't believe that. And I was actually the first person to walk over with my phone at the time to start recording the interview. And just in a matter of seconds, next thing I know, right in front of my phone comes Fox Sports microphone, an ESPN microphone, a CBS 46 microphone, a Sports Illustrated microphone. All these different media outlets are all there. And I'm able to get in one more question before I have to leave and go about wanting to go interview some of the other players. And as I got in my last question and I was leaving, Richard Sherman actually tapped me on my shoulder and he said, "Hey, you keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
I respect you." So I'm always going to feel differently about Richard Sherman as opposed to how most people may feel about him.
Well,
and I have my right to feel that way.
Sure. Why not? He helped you boost your time. The first person I ever interviewed, my first major interview?
Who would that be?
Tommy Lasorda of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Called me a diamond in the rough. How would that make you feel? Well, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Oh, I had a great interview with O.J. Simpson when Howard Cosell turned me down, believe it or not. So even though O.J. may have had some other problems later on down the road, O.J. Simpson did nothing but help meet my confidence at a time when I needed it. And I don't have time to get into all the names, but sometimes if somebody gives you a positive experience about the whole thing, you're certainly going to remember them for all the right reasons. Sammy Sosa is a guy who even know a lot of people knock him for his drug use. We worked together back in 1987, so I don't think I could ever go to a game as a fan, and if I do, it would be far and few between. I can't go to a game as a fan. Either I'm in the box because I have a mentality for me that I'm working, otherwise I'm just not interested in going. I mean, there might be something every now and then, but very rare. But I'm with you.
You're the first person who I've actually talked to who actually feels the same way that I feel about that. Because after that day in particular, I said I can't go to any more sporting events as a fan anymore. Because this was just a different experience for me. Whether it's football, whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball, I can't do this as a fan anymore. Because for me, I just feel like it's not meant for me to be a fan out there amongst the people.
Right.
I love the people, but I love also providing this service that it is that we provide to the people. And I enjoy the perks that we get with this too. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm not enjoying the free food that we're enjoying in the press box.
Right.
Yes, I absolutely enjoy going to the press box and being able to get free food, especially when there's no count on how much of it that you can get,
That's true.
as opposed to having to spend money on concessions
Right, that's
for
true.
something that's limited. So,
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and I'll throw that out there right now. But, I just wanted to ask about the Thanksgiving cuisine in particular because I covered another Falcons game later on in that season. It was actually their very last game of the season, and it was against Carolina, the Panthers, right when they were getting started earlier in the decade with being a perennial playoff team. And I had a chance to interview many players after the game that day as well, Tony Gonzalez being one of them, and it was actually his final game. No, I take that back. I did not get to interview Tony Gonzalez at that game because it was his last football game. There was a lot going on. The Falcons were coming off of a disappointing season, so morale was very low, as you can imagine. But I did get to interview him a little after the Seattle game. And Scott, the biggest takeaway that I walked away from that interview with, honestly, was he's actually a little smaller in person than he appears on the camera.
Right. That's true.
That was the biggest takeaway I came away from that. Now, of course, he had some great hard-hitting things that he wanted to say as well with the media, and of course, I took that into account. But, it was also one of those interviews where it's like, I'm doing this simply because it's a priority for me to do this for you guys because they absolutely just came in here and mollywopped us in our dome, and we're having a horrible season when we're coming off of a year where we were a fourth down away from going to the Super Bowl. I really don't want to do this right now. But that was the biggest takeaway I came away from that. And when I was also in the Falcons locker room, when I actually saw Matt Ryan up close, Scott, it made me realize I don't think the normal person honestly takes into consideration how big these quarterbacks actually are.
Right.
Because, of course, you're looking at the offensive linemen, you're looking at the defensive players, the linebackers, the other guys on the front seven. But when I saw Matt Ryan, Scott, I was like, the size of this guy, he could just alone with his size be viewed as a basketball player. I honestly couldn't believe how tall he was in person and how stout he was, too. I honestly couldn't believe it. So, me being able to have those locker room experiences and us having this conversation right now, that exposed me to a few different things as well. Because you realize that some of these guys jump off the camera at you in general. I ain't never looked at Matt Ryan as a big guy prior to that day in particular. But let me get back to the cuisines really quickly because I did ask you about that. But now I want to ask you about, what was it like to cover a player like Barry Sanders on Thanksgiving?
Oh, goodness,
Especially during the years when the Lions weren't doing so well necessarily, but they did have a few years in there where they were going to the playoffs. As a matter of fact, in Barry Sanders' first few years, if I remember correctly, they actually went as far as going to the NFC Championship. So it wasn't always miserable.
What was that like? Unbelievable, undescribable. It really was. I mean, not only was he a great player, but a great person, too. I don't care whether it was Thanksgiving or not Thanksgiving. To watch Barry Sanders is a treat. So, I got to tell you a funny Thanksgiving story, though. I think that we talked about this being a very lighthearted show. I'll give you one. I had a girlfriend back at the time named Diane, and every now and then she would go ahead and forget her ID. So, I decided to take her to Windsor, Canada, just to teach her a lesson. So she didn't have her ID. Back then, though, the security regulations weren't so bad. And I said, and she thought I was going to leave her in Canada. But she'll just say, Diane, you better have your ID on at all time. I got us back through customs. Proved a point. Not trying to get off the Barry Sanders subject. I was thinking about it. Just thought I'd talk about a Thanksgiving memory with her. And that was the day we were actually
we've already gone all the way off the rails with all of this anyway. So at this point, it's like, let's
Sure, why not? So I have a girlfriend with no ID. I'm broiling a turkey. And yes, can't forget Barry Sanders was definitely the main course on Thanksgiving. And being able to go ahead and cover football games. But the one thing you've got to understand that you haven't brought up yet that I'm going to tell you is you're talking about the free food, right? Well, what about the fact that if you're in the press box, pal, if it's raining out on the field, you're not getting wet. You're staying right up at the desk working, brother. I'm telling you, that's good stuff.
I've never taken that into consideration because the only two professional games I covered were inside of the Georgia Dome. So nobody was in there getting wet anyway.
Well,
so that's the reason I haven't taken that into consideration.
You got a log.
But I will say this right now. The day we met in Miami,
right,
for the Savannah State Miami Hurricanes game,
right,
had that happened that day, had there been inclement weather, I'm pretty sure that would have been a memory that would have stuck with me. Like, I'm so glad we're up here and we're not out there being rained on like this.
Getting your phone number on that day is the most memorable day of my life, knowing I came up with a great young guy like you. Yeah, forget about the stupid score, even though it was 77-0. I hit a grand slam finding you, pal. Now, I should point, so just so you know, and I hope everybody out there hears that, you know, you're like my son. But, you know, one day you'll deal with the rainy weather, but you wouldn't even know nothing about sitting next to a guy unless you covered a guy in the NBA. And I remember sitting next to Rick Smits in the Pacers locker room. And you know what? I felt like I needed a ladder to talk to this guy because my arm was getting a stretching exercise that you'd never believe. Sit next to a guy like that's 7'2", and you feel like you're interviewing a giraffe. Rick Smits. Forget about Marino. Forget about these quarterbacks, pal. I'm talking about a 7'2", 7'4" center, pal. Try that one out, Xavier. Tell me. You like talking?
I've only had one encounter in my life where I've been up to somebody face to face who is 7 feet tall, and that was a high school basketball player. So this was not a well figured out athlete just yet. As a matter of fact, he was tall, but he had no type of stoutness or weight on him. So it was almost out there like watching a Slim Jim. That's the best way I can put that. So I can only imagine what that was like in particular.
Well, another lifetime ago, Xavier, when I was covering the Bad Boys, and yes, I covered the Bad Boys. I covered Barry Sanders. Back from 1988 to 99, I had some of those unbelievable times as a journalist for the Detroit Monitor to be able to cover some great Detroit teams. I didn't do a lot about hockey back then, but every now and then I did. Did some baseball, but the NFL and the NBA were big at the time because I used to spend a lot of time at the Palace of Auburn Hills and the Pontiac Silverdome, and the memories were just unbelievable. Yes, there were some career-ending injuries that I prefer not to talk about, but you know, when you cover certain sports, you have to go ahead and see the good, the bad, and the ugly. But you know, Xavier, all I can tell you, pal, is you got your whole life in front of you. I'm so excited about what the future has in store for you. I really am. And that at the age of, I'll be turning 57 in December on the 29th, and I look at a young guy like you who has so much potential that you not only have, but some of the talent that you've exhibited, that to me, you got it all to look forward to, pal.
And as always, those sentiments are very much appreciated, Scott. And, you know, I'm very appreciative of everything that you've helped pour into me along this journey as well. And I'm hopeful that, you know, we can continue to keep this going as long as we possibly can. Continuing to grow the network, continuing to grow our connection, just everything along those lines.
Well, we made it.
I truly am, and I really value it.
We've already made a commitment to do it, and I see no reason why we wouldn't, unless, God forbid, I get seriously ill, but you never know. But we both have the energy and the desire and the steam to do it, you know, and we're going to do it the way we do it. And I want to see you develop beyond just sports. I mean, you got too much to offer than just being one-dimensional, you know, and that's really what it's about. But as far as what we talked about tonight, I know we've talked about the broiled turkey, the microwave grilled cheese, along with the other things that we talked about. I just think it's just fun how you have two people that can let their imagination run